Hi everyone, my name's Luke Watson. Today I'm going to talk to you briefly about the life of an auditor. I'm currently a third year at SoM Uni and I did a industrial placement last year as an auditor at Grant Thornton, and then I also did an internship with PwC as well. That was also as an auditor. So I've managed to see quite a lot of audit in my time, and I've also looked at the way different firms perhaps deal with it. So today I'm going to sort of be discussing the role of an auditor, my personal experiences, how maybe you get into auditing, a day-to-day life, and sort of any recommendations, and also where a career in audit can lead you in the future. So essentially the role of an auditor is to provide an opinion on a company's financial statements, that they are true and fair. And essentially the way in which auditors do this is they would go physically to a company's premises after a company has prepared internally its accounts, and we would essentially look at their accounts and we would review every what we call material transaction to make sure that what they are presenting is a true and fair reflection of what their company is actually doing. So, for example, we would look at revenue, which is the amount of money a company is bringing in, and we would look at that number and we go, right, is this number true and fair? Is this how much money they're actually making? And we would do various tests in which we can analyze that figure to make sure it is actually the true figure. Now, all companies over a certain size have to provide audited accounts, which essentially means that their financial statements have been signed off essentially by an auditor. This then means there is essentially an endless supply of work for auditors. Now, that the issue comes with the different sizes of companies. You might have a very large retailer that has millions of transactions a day, such as Primark or Asda or anything like that, to sort of maybe small tech companies that don't have many transactions. So different auditors and different audit firms will provide different services to different clients, and that's where you get the size of accounting firms, and that makes a difference. So traditionally the big four accountants deal with the most largest companies, which are commonly listed on the sort of FTSE 100. They will mostly deal with those, and the way their business is set up, they have the staff numbers and they have the technology to be able to do those audits. Whereas smaller professional service firms are traditionally more set up to do smaller audits. Now, Grant Thornton is known as sort of a medium-sized audit firm, so they weren't dealing with the biggest clients, but they also weren't dealing with the smallest. So there I personally got to see how businesses work in sort of the medium-sized, compared to when I did my internship at PwC, which was a lot more FTSE clients. So they had huge international clients that were dealing with sort of across different time zones, huge complex structures. So it was really interesting for me to compare the two differences and get to compare the two types of clients that each firm has. So the day-to-day life of an auditor usually depends on what client you're booked to for that particular point of time. Usually you'll get assigned a specific client for a certain length of time, and this can vary on a huge amount of things depending on the size of the client, the resourcing requirements, your role in the team. So it can be things from, say, an individual day to a large number of months. Some of the biggest clients in the world are a year-long client, so you essentially work on one client all year and never sort of move off. A lot of my clients were sort of week-long audits, so you may be there for 1, 2, 3 weeks, probably commonly maybe about 2 weeks. And there's various stages of an audit. Generally you'd sort of start the planning phase, and being on a placement year, you start essentially as what we would call a A1, which is a first year. Now, first years aren't generally really involved with the planning. First years usually only really have an impact on field work, which is sort of in the middle part. So you normally have the planning and then you have the field work, and then essentially you have the concluding or the review. And first years usually spend the majority of their time on field work. So this is usually, again, depending on the size, say 3 weeks in. So you would, on your first day on the client, you'd normally go to the client site, depending on wherever they're based. So you'd get introduced to the team, and the team would generally vary depending on every client. Every client would have a different team working with you. So naturally you get to know a lot of different people in the office. And then your team would most likely introduce you to the client. So you generally speak to the financial controller, and they would maybe be your key person on the audit. So you'd speak with them, and essentially them as the finance team of the client would give you a bunch of information, and you'd process that information and perform tests on that information. And a lot of the tests would require you to go and physically speak to the finance team. I remember at my first day on site, you literally have to go out and speak to this someone you've never met before, and someone much more qualified and experienced than you, about something they've given you. So it's quite difficult in terms of giving yourself enough self-confidence to go out and speak to them about something which you don't really know a lot about, but luckily you have the support of your team there. You can generally ask questions to them beforehand, before you go out and ask the client a bit of inquiry, and generally they will hopefully give you useful information, of which you can complete your test. You would, as I say, complete your test, and you would submit that for review by the manager, and you would essentially do that. The whole team would do that across a whole large number of tests, and the manager and one of them being a partner would review the whole, what we call an audit file, which is just everyone's tests. Once we've reviewed all those tests and they meet various benchmarks and everyone's happy with it, the audit's signed off, and that essentially means we as the auditors deem that this company's financial statements are true and fair, which means that they can then get published with the auditor's approval, which then means, for example, they'll be happy to get a bank loan, and investors can look at it having the confidence that the financial accountants that the accounts are signed off by the auditors. So obviously the job is fairly technical. There's a lot of accounting theory, and naturally coming from an accounting and finance background, as in it's what I studied in my degree, it was a lot easier for me. There was a lot of people there who hadn't even studied financial accounting, business, economics. We had people coming in, say, doing music, chemistry. So on the first day, we were naturally on very different playing fields, but through training and on-the-job training, we all got brought to a very similar level. So probably about 80 to 90% of the training will be on the job, which is you going to clients and learning through stuff there. But at Grant Thornton, we got specific time set out where we would get, say, shipped away to a hotel for a week. We would stay there with a bunch of people around the country, and we would do a training course for a week. One of the first ones was called Talent 19. They do it every year, and it coincides with when the graduate audits are hired. So everyone gets shipped out, and this year it was at Warwick University, and we went and we essentially learned the basics of double entry, which is a method of accounting. We went there, we spent a week there, living there. So you sort of go to essentially college, 9 to 5, you'd learn theory there, play a bit of games. It'd generally be very fun. You get all your meals provided, you get accommodation provided as well. In the evenings, you would go, they might have a bar on site, have a bit of fun, just do some evening activities. It was very social, fun, and it was a great way to learn sort of unique skills from people who had actually been in the industry, knew it inside out. So that was very, very beneficial. So what I would say was the biggest advantage of audit, working in a professional service firm, over things maybe such as advisory and tax, is you get to see a huge amount of different businesses, and you get to see a huge amount of different processes within that business, from looking at their stock, looking at their HR, looking at how they would manage the cash flows, all those kind of things. Whereas advisory and tax are quite specific. So when this comes to professional exams, this makes life a lot easier, as all auditors when you graduate or you're on a school leaver program, you get put on a training contract to complete your chartered accountancy qualifications, and that's generally all paid for by the firm, but this coincides with your work day to day. So a lot of the times you can be working day to day, you could finish and you would go home and you would study for the professional exams, of which you'll get an assigned day off to go and complete the exam. Depending on which exam board you take, depending on the number of exams there are, this can sort of vary your timetable. Also, depending on the firm, some firms will give college time or just training, of which you'll get a week off. You go to college and they'll teach you the various things for that particular exam. Depending on the exam, it may be self-study, so you'll get some study leave, and you essentially go and you'd sit and you'd read through the exam specification and teach it yourself. This all depends on the firm and the exam board and what exam you're taking. Of course, this can be quite difficult whilst working at the same time. As a placement student at Grant Thornton, we didn't do any professional exams. This can vary depending on firm. Most firms don't, but there are a few in the Big Four who do a training contract whilst you're on placement. So that's maybe something to look at when you're applying for the firm. So it can be, as I said, it's quite difficult to manage, but ultimately, because it's all paid for by the firm, it can be quite rewarding. If you pass with the exam, you do really well, and you can finish your training contract having had 3 years experience in an accountancy firm, and also a master's level qualification attached to your name, which has all been paid for. So at the end of the 3 years, your training contract will generally be up, and most firms usually offer you a permanent position, which is generally at the manager level, and you go straight into that. Or a lot of people, they've realised audit isn't for them and they seek out alternative routes. So this can be within professional services. They could work in maybe something like tax, they could go into advisory, or they could go into industry and they could work, say maybe even one of their clients they've worked on previously, maybe they have some links and they can go in, and they essentially work in one company, and they've used all the skills they've learned as an auditor to work their way up the industry ladder. And you can perhaps learn positions such as CFO, quite high ranking jobs, through your knowledge that you've gained as an auditor. Or you can stay at your firm and work your way up the career ladder there, from manager to senior manager to associate director to director, and then eventually to partner. So the one thing that audit does give you is a lot of flexibility, because you haven't really specialised too early. It means you've got a lot of options open for future careers. So I hope that's given you a brief outline of the life of an auditor and perhaps what a career in audit can give you. As I said, a lot of these things really depend on the firm you work for. Especially the size of the firm. It can mean instead of having projects for a year long, you might only have projects for a week, and that can hugely impact your experience. Some will employ a large audit team, some might only employ 1 or 2, and that also impacts your experience. And it really depends on individual personalities, what's right for who. So I think the best piece of advice I can give is really do your research, find out where you see yourself, and find out what firm will be best for you. And as such, once you've done that research, that passion and that knowledge should hopefully really come across in the application process. That should hopefully make you a much more successful applicant. If you would like to learn any more, please feel free to either email me or just drop me a message on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to give any advice or any questions that you specifically might have. So thanks very much, everyone.